The first shift is that denuclearization of the peninsula is the only acceptable answer. It used to be that you'd hear a lot of talk about freeze for freeze or suspension for suspension. There's a recognition that that's no good anymore. North Korea is selling weapons across the world to all sorts of regimes and bad actors. And North Korea has stated that it would be willing to proliferate nuclear weapons for the right price. And so you have a regime that could possess nuclear weapons that could engage in extortion, blackmail, and then sell those most destructive weapons on Earth to the highest bidder or to anybody willing to meet their price.
Well, it's pretty evident that they have an aggressive program, and they've been developing it for decades, both missile and nuclear warheads as well. Is there, and the agreed framework, as you noted, didn't work because they cheated, and the program has gone on and on and on. We've tried sanctions. We've engaged the world. We've done a lot of different things to try to deter this nuclear program in North Korea. Is there anything short? Do you see anything short of war at this point? And I'm not saying I'm advocating for war or against it, but what are the solutions? What are the possibilities?
Well, I mean, the possibility is that North Korean regime recognizes that the continued pursuit of these nuclear weapons and missiles is a dead end. And the only way to do that really now, short of war, is through coercive economic power that rests mainly in the hands of China, but with others as well. And the trend has been extremely positive. The trend has been positive in that more and more countries are stopping all trade with North Korea. Vietnam, for example, the Philippines, the list really is quite a long one.
But there's the illicit. They just stopped. There were just 2 ships with petroleum that have been products in violation of sanctions that have been stopped in the last 2 weeks. So it's getting in there, some of it.
Well, that's why everybody needs to do more. You've seen South Korea just interdict 2 ships and impound 2 ships, and the new UN sanctions will allow even greater sanctions on shipping companies that allow this illicit trade to continue. But really, as everybody knows, China has the vast majority of the coercive economic power over the North. And it's our hope that China will act in its interests. We can't ask them to do more than act in their interest.
The hope, but China hasn't. And the president, even long before he became president, I used to interview him when he was just a businessman in New York, because he would talk about China and how they didn't deal fairly with the United States. What makes you think that China now is going to change to use their economic muscle to try to get a result out of North Korea? Is it just the fear that there'll be 26 million people over the borders into North Korea, and that Japan and South Korea want to become nuclear powers? Is that the only thing that's going to change China?
No, China recognizes that the situation has changed fundamentally, and China recognizes 3 fundamental shifts in their own thinking, and 3 fundamental shifts in what we all have to do together. The first shift is that denuclearization of the peninsula is the only acceptable answer. It used to be that you'd hear a lot of talk about freeze for freeze or suspension for suspension. There's a recognition that that's no good anymore because their programs have progressed too far. The second thing is China recognizes that this is a problem really between North Korea and the whole world, including a problem between North Korea and China. There used to be old talk about, well, this is really a problem between the United States and North Korea. China recognizes that it is in China's interest to denuclearize the peninsula, and that's because of the threat of a breakdown in the non-proliferation regime. What if South Korea, what if Japan conclude that they have to arm in similar ways to North Korea? And the third thing is that China recognizes that it really does have the coercive economic power to resolve this situation. And it'll be up to China when and if they make those decisions. As you know, the UN Security Council has come up with more and more restrictions on North Korea, more and more sanctions against North Korea. Those have to be rigorously enforced. But we also have to acknowledge that's not going to be enough. And I think you're right about this. I mean, North Korea, unless more pressure is applied, will not conclude that it's in its interest to denuclearize.
I don't see North Korea, because it really are 2 different people. There's the leaders of North Korea and there's the people. I don't, and I can't, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't see North Korea worried enough about, I don't see anything that makes them want to give up their nuclear weapons. I don't think they care, I don't think there's enough care about feeding their people, about a famine or anything else.
Well, you have different portions of the population in North Korea, obviously. You have the elites in Pyongyang, who live a very comfortable existence at the expense of the rest of the North Korean population who are
but
part of...
they're the ones who make the decision.
They are, but those are the people that have to be affected by these sanctions. These are the people who have to conclude that it is not in their interest to continue on this path, that it is a dead end for them. And of course, this regime hasn't been without dissent. I mean, this is a regime, this is a leader, Kim Jong-un, who's killed members of his own family in the most egregious ways with a banned nerve agent in a public airport in Malaysia, with anti-aircraft guns in front of their military academy in a stadium.
So how do you get him to think like, oh, okay, I've changed my mind. I want to protect my people from war with the United States or economic sanctions from the world, and I'm going to give up my nuclear weapons when he's bragging about them?
Well, I mean, you can't fire a missile without fuel, can you? And North Korea is wholly dependent on external sources for fuel. So there are options available short of war if all nations conclude that it is in their interest to act in a more aggressive manner in terms of economic sanctions and to actually follow through.
If we cut off his ability to launch a nuclear weapon, if he doesn't have the fuel to do it, he still has all those artillery weapons on the southern part of North Korea pointed right at South Korea. How potent or what's the strength that he has there?
Well, of course, this is what North Korea has done, right, over the years, has held the South Korean population at risk. Also, it's been clear since 1953 that the South Korea, that the United States poses no threat to North Korea. Every provocation has come out of North Korea. And so the only reason why North Korea could be pursuing this weapon is to do what? It's actually to coerce or blackmail or extort the United States to leave the peninsula and Northeast Asia,
or to harm
and then
South Korea,
and then to what they've been saying for years. I mean, how many times in his latest speech did Kim Jong-un use the word unification? What kind of unification does he have in mind? He has unification under the domination of the North and its failed system. I mean, this is so. What's important to recognize is that North Korea is pursuing this nuclear weapon not for just defensive purposes that you hear some people argue about, but really for coercive purposes, for offensive purposes, and the world has to recognize that.
You know, it's interesting that I don't think, I've been to North Korea 3 times. I don't have a sense, and it's just, it's a random sampling. It's in no way any scientific study. I don't have any sense that the people of North Korea themselves don't think that they have the best place on earth to live, except for those who maybe get some sort of information from the West. But I think that's the problem too, is that there's a potent, the people aren't with us. The people are not against their leadership, at least not right now.
Well, it's been 3 generations now of leadership who systematically brainwash their own population, who deny them access to outside information. Once information can penetrate that society, I mean, this is what he probably fears the most, right? I mean, so there are some who argue what we really need to do is open the gates to this misunderstood regime in the North. Of course, that's one of the things that the North fears the most, because it will expose all the lies. It will expose all of the hypocrisy.
Which why they prevent the information from coming in.
Absolutely.
Which is why they're not. Kim Jong-un in a recent speech talked about making a gesture to South Korea, said maybe they'll send athletes to participate in the Olympic Games, and maybe they'll have negotiations, and also has a button on their. I think he says he has a button on his desk to launch a nuclear weapon against us. What are your thoughts about that? About his gesture to South Korea?
Well, anybody who thought that speech was reassuring was drinking too much champagne over the holidays, and essentially what he said is what you just summarized, that he is building a hair trigger nuclear force that can place the world at risk. So this is a great cause for concern, and I think the speech, it's pretty clear what the purpose was. It wasn't an unsophisticated approach to trying to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States. Of course, that's not going to happen. His provocative actions, what he's been doing, is driving our alliances closer together.
All right, one last question on this. If the economic sanctions don't work for whatever reason, either they don't respond to them, or China doesn't stiffen them, or the North Koreans can cheat around them. If those sanctions don't work, then what? And what's our timetable?
Well, what we have to do is prepare for a broad range of options for the president, and those include military options. And we've made no secret about that, and we'll work closely with our allies as we develop and refine those options. And essentially, if we have to compel the denuclearization of North Korea without the cooperation of that regime, we'll bring those options and our assessment of risks and consequences to the president for decision.
What's the range in military options? What do you see as the far end and the light end?
Well, of course, I'm not going to discuss military plans,
but
those plans
hypothetically,
exist.
Hypothetically, I know you know, but hypothetically, what's the range?
I'm not in a hypothetical position, so
all right, fair enough. But I think the term that's been used by the Trump administration is they are a strategic competitor. And in the past, and not just in the past year since President Trump took office, but in the years past, is that Putin has gained in strength. This is not someone who seems to have been shamed away like, oh, I'm really sorry I was involved in the U.S. election, or I'm ashamed. He seems to be emboldened by this.
Well, he's also now becoming one of the most sanctioned countries on earth. I mean, that can't be in Russian interests. And so I think it's important for Russia to conclude that it's in its interest to, Russia's not going to act against its interests. We don't expect Russia to act against its interests or to do the United States or anybody else a favor. What we want to do is to be able to find areas of cooperation so we can help convince Russia that it's in its interest to work together on some of these key priority threats to the world. I mean, how could it be in Russia's interest to have the non-proliferation regime break down in Northeast Asia, to see other nations in Northeast Asia armed with nuclear weapons? It's not in Russia's interest. You already see South Korea and Japan and their alliance with us strengthened. You see South Korea and Japan arming at a breakneck pace. And so this is not in Russia's interest. And the way to resolve this is to resolve this problem with North Korea and really allow Northeast Asia to enjoy a new era of prosperity. Can you imagine, without that threat from North Korea, how Russia, China, everyone would benefit from that?
What surprises you most about the job before you took it, and now that you've been in the seat?
Well, what surprises me the most is the high quality of people I get to work with. I mean, these extremely dedicated civil servants and officers from across our government on this National Security Council are tremendous. It is a great privilege to work with them. And then I guess what surprised me as well is the degree to which we are working together based on our common interests with so many nations around the world. I mean, we have great relationships with our counterparts between national security councils and national security advisors. It's maybe part support group, but it's also a group of like-minded nations that are trying to advance and protect the interests of our citizens. And we have as we're talking about, a lot of problems that we're working on, but we're also working on opportunities to increase the security and prosperity of all of our peoples and of the world.
General, thank you very much, and good luck. We'll be watching, and I hope you come back.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you,
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.